The movie begins by showing us Donald's daily life. He's a dedicated farmer who looks after his elderly mom, Florence, and takes care of their farm. In his spare time, he helps his neighbor fix their car without asking for anything in return. Surprisingly, the neighbor gives Donald an old RV, thinking he might be able to repair it and make some money. While Donald is at his neighbor's house, they encourage him to take a break from his routine and have some fun. But Donald feels a strong bond with his mom and doesn't want to leave her alone. Later that night, Florence reads the obituaries in the newspaper and feels sad because many people she knows have passed away. She's worried, but Donald offers to stay with her for comfort. Still, Florence insists that he should go out and enjoy life. Donald decides to visit a bar and tries to ask the bartender out. Trouble starts when a group of drunk men begin causing chaos, and one of them starts bothering the bartender. Donald steps in to help, but one of the men mocks him for living with his mom. Just before things escalate, the bartender kicks the troublemaker out. Donald leaves the bar and returns to the old RV. He looks around and decides to make the RV his new home. For the next few days, he works hard to fix it up until it's in good condition. He then takes Florence to see the refurbished RV, hoping to take her on a trip to a place she and his dad used to love. However, she gets upset and refuses. Later, Florence feels guilty and brings him a pack of beer as a peace offering. Donald drinks the beer and goes to bed. That night, he has a strange dream where he's in a forest and his mom suddenly appears. He calls out to her, but she screams for help, which wakes him up. Donald feels uneasy, so he leaves the RV and sees a mysterious figure in a cloak, Slender Man, walking away from his house and getting into a car. Donald rushes inside and finds his mom lying lifeless on the floor. He calls 911, and the police arrive to question him about what happened. Donald tells them about the two men he saw leaving the house, but the cops seem skeptical and give him a hard time. A few days later, they hold a gathering to remember Florence, and Donald's Uncle Eamon comes over with a few other people. Then, a few days after that, Donald is in the front yard and sees a car speeding away from his gate as soon as they notice him. The following night, Donald is cleaning up his mom's room when he hears a noise coming from the barn. He grabs a shotgun and goes to check it out, but two masked men catch him off guard. They force him to drop his shotgun and try to make it look like he hanged himself. They put a noose around his neck, but they don't do it correctly, so Donald ends up standing on his feet. They move him aside to fix their mistake. Seizing the opportunity, Donald grabs a heavy sledgehammer. He attacks one of the men, and they start wrestling. Donald eventually gains control and hits the man on the head with the sledgehammer, killing him. He then punches the other man, knocking him down, and takes off his mask, revealing a scared young boy. The boy admits that they were sent to kill Donald and make it look like an accident, but he doesn't know anything more. Donald thinks about calling the police, but changes his mind when he stands where his mother was killed. Instead, he persuades the young boy, Bartosz, to lie to his boss and say the job is done. They agree to meet the next day. Donald buries the dead man in his backyard, grabs a bag, and drives off in his RV, with Bartosz tied up and gagged. As they drive, Donald stops to question Bartosz about his mother's death, but the boy has no idea who killed her. Bartosz reveals that he was forced into this because some men kidnapped his sister and are threatening to hurt her. Donald, seeking revenge for his mother, convinces Bartosz to help him and also rescue his sister, Kaya, to which Bartosz agrees. They arrive at the meeting place and see a van arrive with Kaya inside. Donald takes a shotgun, and the two head to the bar. Bartosz enters through the front and meets Gavigan and Jerome, the men who sent him to kill Donald. Gavigan asks about the other man and proof that the job is finished. Bartosz says the proof is on the other guy's phone. He just wants to see his sister, but Gavigan reveals that the girl is another kidnapped victim who tried to escape. Jerome holds Bartosz, and Gavigan kills the girl with a hammer. Donald, who had entered through the back, sees Jerome disposing of the girl's body and locks him in a room. He then surprises Gavigan and holds him at gunpoint, making him drop the hammer. Donald realizes Gavigan isn't his mother's killer, but thinks he might know something. Donald forces him out of the building at gunpoint and knocks him out before putting him in the van. They drive into the forest, and Donald prepares a meal for himself and Bartosz. Eventually, Gavigan wakes up, and Donald tries to get him to talk, wanting to know why they killed his mother. But instead of answering, Gavigan starts insulting Florence. Angered, Donald presses a hot pot against Gavigan's forehead, burning him and making him scream in pain. After some time, Gavigan breaks down and confesses that someone higher up wanted Donald dead. He reveals that two people were sent, a man named Trevor and the driver, who is actually Gavigan's boss, Frankie. Donald tries to figure out if they targeted Florence to rob her, but Gavigan doesn't know. Donald steps out of the van to relieve himself, and Gavigan uses the opportunity to attack Bartosz and tries to escape. Donald grabs a shotgun, and he and Bartosz chase after him. Gavigan somehow manages to free his hands and contacts Trevor, informing him that Donald is still alive. Trevor is in the car with Frankie, who, surprisingly, turns out to be a woman. They both start to worry. Back in the forest, Gavigan surprises Bartosz, beating him up and threatening to harm his sister. Donald suddenly appears, distracting Gavigan, allowing Bartosz to stab him. Gavigan starts begging for help, but he soon dies from his wound. Meanwhile, Jerome manages to escape and informs Frankie that Bartosz is looking for his sister, but they can't find her because they don't know her name. Frankie gets angry at their failure and tells Trevor to personally find the girl. Donald and Bartosz bury Gavigan in the forest when Gavigan's phone rings. It's Frankie, urging Donald to stop before more people get hurt. Donald demands to know why they killed his mother, but Frankie hints that Florence was involved in something serious and had been a target for years. Donald doesn't fully understand, but he warns Frankie that now she is in danger before hanging up. Donald goes to his Uncle Eamon's place and shows him a picture he found in Florence's room of a man who isn't his dad. Eamon reluctantly explains that after Donald's father passed away, a man named Joe helped Florence for a while. Eamon points out that Joe's daughter is Frankie. Donald learns that Joe got involved with some dangerous people, and despite Florence's efforts to protect him, he was eventually killed. Back in the van, Donald asks Bartosz to look up information about a man named Joe. They discover that Joe was connected to some political murders, but it still doesn't explain why Florence was killed. Donald is determined to find Frankie and get some answers. Bartosz then reveals that Kaya knows where Frankie's hideout is. Finding Kaya might lead them straight to Frankie. They come up with a plan where Donald pretends to be interested in some shady dealings involving young girls. He arranges to meet Kaya, who now goes by the name Alicia, at a hotel at 6. Donald and Bartosz head to the hotel, and Donald dresses up in a suit. He goes inside, talks to a guard, and bribes him to get directions to a room. As Donald looks around, he comes face to face with Kaya. At first, Kaya is really scared and doesn't believe Donald is working with Bartosz. But when she hears her brother's voice on the phone, she calms down and starts to trust Donald. They create a distraction, and Donald takes down the guard. Donald asks Kaya where Frankie is, but then realizes that Bartosz lied. Kaya has no idea where Frankie is. Without wasting time, Donald goes back to the guard and demands to know Frankie's location. The guard refuses to talk, so Donald uses a hot iron to force him to reveal the information by pressing it against his crotch until he talks. Meanwhile, Bartosz is outside and doesn't notice Jerome sneaking into the building. Donald gets the information he needs and is about to leave when they run into Jerome. A brutal fight breaks out between them, leaving both men bloodied. Just when it looks like Jerome is going to win, Kaya shoots him dead and helps Donald escape the building. The two siblings are reunited and embrace, happy to see each other again, before driving away in the van. A little later, Frankie and Trevor arrive at the building and find Jerome dead and the guard in pain. The guard insists he didn't reveal anything about Frankie, but Frankie kills him with the iron anyway. After some time, Donald recovers, and he, Bartosz, and Kaya go to the address the guard gave them and keep watch outside. Donald starts to think that Frankie believes Florence had something to do with her father's death, but he is certain she's wrong. Donald spots Trevor leaving the place and follows him to Frankie's house, where he sees them talking. Donald prepares to take action, but changes his mind when he sees Frankie's daughter with her. On their way back to their camp, they are almost attacked by a gunman, but manage to escape unharmed. Bartosz suggests that Donald should stop and hints that Florence might not be as innocent as he thinks. Donald pulls over, and things get tense as he nearly fights Bartosz over his comments. He angrily tells them both to leave for feeling sorry for Frankie. Frankie is at home when she gets a call from the gunman, who tells her about his mistake. She blames Trevor for not taking care of Donald earlier, even though he had warned her not to kill Florence, and she fires him on the spot, ordering him to leave. Donald then arrives at Eamon's place and finds it covered in blood, with Eamon badly beaten upstairs. Eamon begs Donald to stop going after Frankie and to consider it even with her death. He tearfully reveals to Donald that Florence had an affair with Joe. When Joe's enemies threatened young Donald, Florence betrayed Joe to protect her family. Eamon urges Donald to end the cycle of revenge before he dies. As Donald gazes out the window, he sees Frankie's car pulling up outside. Frankie notices Donald's van and sends one of her men inside to kill Eamon and Donald. After waiting for a while and hearing nothing from her hitman, Frankie decides to go in herself. She discovers Eamon's and her hitman's dead bodies, but is too late to realize that Donald has set a trap for her. Donald points a gun at Frankie, takes away her weapon, and forces her into his van. He drives her to the beach where her father was killed. Meanwhile, Trevor is alone in a store when he gets a call saying that Donald has kidnapped Frankie. Bartosz and Kaya have found a place to rest, but Bartosz is worried about Donald, so he goes out to look for him. He arrives at Eamon's place, armed, but finds Trevor there, calm and asking where Frankie is. Bartosz warns that Donald might kill Frankie and foolishly tells Trevor that he's leaving, only to be ambushed and knocked out. The next morning, Donald shows Frankie a picture of Florence and her father, trying to explain why Florence did what she did. He starts leading her to a grave he dug. Frankie then explains that someone shot her father before his enemies arrived to finish him off, and she believes it was Florence. Donald refuses to believe this until Frankie reveals that she spoke with Florence before she died. According to Frankie, Florence was deeply in love with Joe, so much that she put him above her own family. But when Joe decided to end things and stay with his family, Florence couldn't handle it. Out of jealousy, she shot him and then called Leo to help cover it up. Hearing this, Donald hesitates, struggling to pull the trigger. Frankie reminds him that she has a daughter who will be left behind, and Donald eventually stops himself from killing her as he turns to leave. Frankie suddenly attacks him with a shovel he used to dig her grave and tries to escape. She manages to break free, grabs a gun, but Donald shoots her dead. Donald finally picks up his phone, which has been ringing all evening. He thinks it might be Bartosz, but it turns out to be Trevor. Donald pleads with Trevor not to harm Bartosz, even offering to surrender instead. He asks to speak with Bartosz, and Trevor hands over the phone. Bartosz can barely say goodbye before Trevor shoots him dead, telling Donald to come and find him. The movie ends with Donald standing on the beach, shocked and filled with anger. So the moral of the story is, when life gives you an RV, don't turn it into a crime-fighting command center. Just stick to road trips and marshmallows.